All right, so on March 5th, 1770, protests were carrying on outside the Boston Custom House. That's where they take the taxes, so of course that's where they're going to go and protest. And colonists, they started really getting on the British. They start throwing insults at them, calling them names, snowballs, and rocks. And so the British, wanting to protect themselves, they send for more troops. Eventually, they fired into the crowd. They killed 5 people in the Boston Massacre. Yes, 5 is not a massacre. It's the papers and Paul Revere that kind of built it up to make it a massacre. And there's some more info on the Boston Massacre, and yet more info on the Boston Massacre. Now, Parliament's going to back down again after the Boston Massacre. They preserved the tax on tea, though. They wanted to show that they're the superiors and that they're in charge, so they kept that tax on tea. Of course, the colonists said, yeah, your tax on tea doesn't mean anything to us, and we're going to really get you here. So on December 16th, 1773, the colonists took the protest into their own hands. And guess what they did with that tea? They tossed it in Boston Harbor, hence the Boston Tea Party. So the Boston Tea Party, they're tossing that tea to protest the taxes. You want more on the Boston Tea Party? You have to hit no thanks, but you'll get some. And yet more on the Boston Tea Party. And that's a pretty good video right there. Now, British leaders, they respond to the Boston Tea Party by saying, until you pay the whole price of that tea, we're going to close Boston Harbor. And guess what? You guys are starting to get kind of violent with us, so we're going to send some troops and some warships. The colonists respond. They said, these are the intolerable acts. We cannot deal with the closing of Boston Harbor. And they respond with more protest and more violence. So all the colonies said, well, we're all in this together. And they send reps to Philly in 1774 for the First Continental Congress. And what do they agree on there? They agree that they're not going to buy and keep any more British stuff. They're going to boycott British goods. And they agree on a system to enforce that. I kill you! This is the actual war. Now, on April 19, 1775, the real stuff erupts in the towns west of Boston called Lexington and Concord. So the war actually starts in Lexington and Concord. And it starts because the governor of Massachusetts sent a whole bunch of British troops over to Lexington and Concord and said, you got to go get these weapons that people like John Hancock are putting away. And if you want more on Lexington and Concord, there you go. And yet some more. My internet's running slow, but it should work with yours. Now, the colonists are tipped off by writers such as Paul Revere, so they call out their militia to meet the British threat. This is where Paul Revere comes in. He tips them off, and he wasn't the only one, though. But here's some on Paul Revere. Sorry, my internet's running slow. Should work for you. Now, at Lexington and Concord, the British ordered the colonists to disperse. And the colonists were actually trying to when a shot rang out. Somebody fired a gun. Somebody messed up. And so now it's on. And the British laid the smackdown to the colonists at Lexington. But they were actually ambushed a lot on their way back to Boston. So in May of 1775, colonies say, well, the war's on. We got to get back together. And they assemble at Philadelphia for the Second Continental Congress. In the spring of 1776, Great Britain says, well, you guys are at war with us, we're going to pass some stuff on you in Parliament. And they pass the Prohibitory Acts. It blockades all the colonial ports. Going to be a big problem as the war goes on. And this moved many in the Continental Congress to want to get rid of the Brits. They want independence. But guess what? They lack permission from their own states. This began changing in April and June. So on May 15th, 1776, Richard Henry Lee moves for independence. John Adams seconds this vote for independence. But guess what? Congress decides to postpone the vote until they can get state approval. They say, okay, you can do it. And so here's some more on Richard Henry Lee and some more on John Adams.